My name's Monk Rowe. Very pleased to have David Torkanowsky here for a college concert, fall coming jazz, we call it at Hamilton.
Beautiful.
26 years we've been doing this concert in the fall, and the room you'll be playing in has graced such people as Dick Hyman and Bucky Pizzarelli,
Ooh,
Clark Terry, and Sweets, who you were mentioning before.
So you couldn't get anybody good.
I was watching you about 2 hours ago, and I think we got somebody good.
All right, thanks.
And I want to start with an odd question. It's not a question, it's like, can we talk about eighth notes?
Sure.
When I was listening to you play, you did Body and Soul, but you did a tune before that, and I didn't catch the name of it. It might have just been
Could have been an extemporaneous.
Yes.
I can't think of what to play. Let me play something
Right.
until I think of something.
Exactly. But you went through, the feel of the music changed as you progressed. And I think it has a lot to do with the series of eighth notes, whether they're straight, whether they're really swingy.
Well, listen, it's, jazz was the popular music of a certain time. And then at some point, rock and roll became the popular music. Now, what was the transition? Well, it was, the eighth note was carrying the water. So in jazz music, the eighth note we consider to be the first and last of a triplet. It's interesting, when I teach young drummers how to swing on a cymbal, I teach them draw a quarter note on the left hand.
Okay.
Draw a quarter note here, a dotted eighth here, and a 16th here, and put your stick right on that. Oh, sorry, put the quarter note here, dotted eighth here, 16th here, ting, 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 and keep that rhythm, keep that pattern. Now, as you go faster, that becomes more eighth notes, and the pattern becomes smaller. Ting, 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 ting. As you go slower, the pattern becomes wider, and the 16th note moves closer to the quarter note. Ting, ting, ting. Now that's the way old cats used to play a ballad. Young cats rarely cross the triplet. Ting, 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 ting. Dig? But the pattern is still the same. And so what happens? Two things happen. First of all, look at my arm. It's swinging. Secondly, you have to ting, ping. On the backbeat, you have to lift the stick and travel. So that puts a ting, ping, ting, ting, ting. That makes you the cymbal pattern swing. So that illustrates the movable eighth note. Now, I think what you're asking me is in swing. The funky players, Phil Woods, for example, he would straighten out eighth notes because that made him sound funky. Horace Silver. The two fathers of funk to me are Horace Silver and Professor Longhair. Professor Longhair comes more out of a Caribbean rumba tradition. But in Horace Silver, he's one of the first cats to straighten out the eighth notes. Now, what you heard me play on that WWOZ post is kind of straight eighth notes with a little jank to it. Now, if you ever heard J.C. Hurd play a bossa nova, it was and it kind of stretched the swing eighth notes, but somewhere between swing and straight, and where that is, and it's up to personal discretion, but it's stretched eighth notes. Dr. John did the same thing, and that's kind of the way Smokey Johnson in New Orleans started playing funk. These cats all came out of a jazz tradition. It kind of a shuffle became straight eighth notes. So it's in that area that I like to explore because it puts a tear into the music. Now, I've done straight recording sessions where they want me to play very precise, and I think I'm playing straight eighth notes, and the producer says, "Hey man, it's cool, but can you not swing it so much?" I didn't even realize I was. So I hope that answers your question.
That's more than answered. I'm really fascinated with that because there's a couple Chuck Berry records, for instance.
Oh,
where
please, we can't talk about Chuck Berry.
We can't.
He's the only guy that ever fired me. You want to hear that story?
I do.
Okay, Quint Davis George Ween's protege, hooked me and a great bass player named George French and a drummer who played with Alvin Batiste out of Baton Rouge named Herman Jackson up as his rhythm section for an entire European tour. Unbeknownst to me, Chuck wanted the great, was it James Johnson? The great Sun Records. John Johnson.
Johnny Johnson.
Johnny Johnson, thank you.
Yes.
The great Sun Records session player. He wanted him to come along as a kind of an MD. And George Ween, who just had to wire $400,000 into Chuck Berry's account ahead of the tour because that was part of the deal, said, absolutely not. If you want Johnny Johnson to come, you got to pay for him. I didn't know any of this at the time. So we had one gig at Penn's Landing in Philadelphia as a warm-up for this entire European tour. Man, Chuck Berry, it's great. So we're here, place is packed, outdoor arena right on the river, beautiful, like an amphitheater. Place is packed. Nobody has seen Chuck Berry.
No rehearsal.
Oh, no. But we got together and like played through some of his tunes in New Orleans. So it's late and the crowd is getting restless. What I didn't know at the time was this is a standard Chuck Berry thing. He sits in his Cadillac with the engine running, sort of near the stage, waiting for somebody to bring him a briefcase of cash before he hits the stage. And this obviously wasn't included in the George Ween European tour that he got paid in advance for. So he got that. All of a sudden, I see what looks like a rugby scrum of security coming through the stage. And in the middle of that scrum is Chuck Berry. All of a sudden he explodes on the stage, and it's grooving. And he is so happy because, we know his music and we're kind of putting that New Orleans stank on it. And, he says, oh man, they usually send kids to play with me. This is great. He was really happy. And, after a solo, y'all ever heard white boy play blues like that? Really jacked, oh man, this is great. This is working out great. So after a particular solo that he kind of built me up for to the crowd, I finished it, with a flourish or whatever, I'm trying to do my best Jerry Lee type shit. And the crowd goes, ah, crowd went crazy. Chuck Berry looked at the crowd, looked at me, put his hands on his hips, let his guitar fall to the ground, was feeding back, and he walked off stage. And we were shuffling as part of the tune. We didn't know. So, I didn't know what to do. I just pulled a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Berry! Made it seem like it was the end of the show. Well, at 2 a.m, Quinn Davis calls me and goes, bro, man, I have to replace you on the tour. Chuck Berry wants to use Johnny Johnson, because he thought you got, you stole his thunder, whatever. I forgot how they put it. And of course I was crushed. I still made George pay me for the tour, but I was crushed because, oh my God, I just got fired by Chuck Berry. I didn't realize there was this other agenda that he's getting out of having to pay Johnny Johnson. But still, I don't like to talk about Chuck Berry, even though he was great.
Well, thank you for that story.
Sure.
It's one of those things, you got fired for playing too good,
That's my story. I don't think I did anything else wrong.
Yeah, well, I guess I was going to say that some of those early records of him, I hear him playing,
Oh,
and
yes.
the band is like a little mystified,
The
right?
band is playing a straight shuffle, and he's like straight.
Yeah.
I love that because you're listening to how rock and roll was born.
Yeah.
And it's just that gangster gangster shuffle.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, can you define skank?
Sure. It's related to the straight eighth notes that we're talking about. It's behind the beat. It's attitude. It's intentional sloppiness without being pretentious about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said.
You know who had skank?
Who?
Johnny Guitar Watson.
Okay.
And I challenge you to tell me what his original instrument was. He was a pianist. And they're hard to find, but you find that Johnny Guitar Watson, before he was Guitar Watson, Little Johnny Watson, whatever, piano trio recordings, he's singing Witchcraft, Willow Weep for Me, I Cried for You, a beautiful tune called When Did You Leave Heaven? I mean, unbelievable. And it's like, these recordings should be used as classroom material to teach young drummers and bass players how to play behind the singer. Just beautiful, and framing the lyric, just beautiful. And he didn't play guitar until he went to a Gatemouth Brown concert. Gatemouth Brown from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and he saw him play guitar and goes, oh my God, I want to play guitar. And he taught himself how to play guitar. And then when you realize on these Johnny Guitar Watson tracks, you know, real motherfucker, he's playing all the keyboards. He was an incredible musician. Fantastic.
Wow.
But listen, see if you can cop those original Johnny Guitar Watson piano trio recordings. They're absolutely astounding because it's his voice. I cried for you. That's so killer. So killer.
Well, you just said playing a little sloppy without being pretentious, and I can see how that would be difficult for a musician who might say, I want to move to New Orleans and get in the music scene. And
a lot of people do that because it's the last place left that has ancestral resonance in the music that's being played today.
okay.
You know, I mean, you play at Preservation Hall and the bass player is putting his peg in the hole that's been worn in the wood that's been there since the 1700s that other bass players have put untold hours of energy, and you know, so it's hard not to feel what came before, and that's, you know, that's leaving us in New Orleans, but it's still there as opposed to most everywhere else.
But feeling, how do I say this? Consciously trying to play behind the beat is hard. It has to become natural, right? And I don't know, how do you make it natural? You
play with people that do it naturally, and you understand, oh man, I'm really comfortable here, and then it becomes part of your vocabulary.
Okay. You don't take it kindly when people or writers or something say, yeah, New Orleans is back to where it was.
Oh, that's interesting you should say that, because somebody asked me to, there's a French bread company in New Orleans called Leidenheimer's. French bread is the bread that po' boys are made out of. And so it's a real old family art. And he said, hey, a friend of mine, journalist, wants to write a story about how New Orleans came back. And I wrote this scathing, blistering letter about, are you kidding me? You know, Katrina was a cultural cataclysm that exploded decades of oral, like A-U-R-A-L, and oral, O-R-A-L traditions. It broke up. The thing that makes New Orleans cool is musical families. You know, grandfathers teaching grandsons how to play banjo or guitar, piano, you know, even kids today putting their fingers where the player piano's keys are depressed, and they learn that way. Family members teaching descendants how to play, musical families, the Marcellus family, the Neville family, that's at least current. The Lasty family, which begat Herlin Riley and the Brunius family. I mean, all of these families have currently working exponents that are doing the legacy of their family. And it's interesting, they play based on what neighborhood they grew up in. You know, 7th Ward Creoles play a little differently. There's 6th Ward second line, which has a little different flavor than 9th Ward second line. Shannon Powell, great New Orleans drummer, last of his kind, Louis Billson level, won Downbeat Awards, best drummer of the year when he was playing with Harry Connick Jr. He's from the 6th Ward, he's the proponent of 6th Ward second line, and they have their own little nuances as opposed to 9th Ward second line. So, the point is, the place is very special. And unfortunately, my ADD kicked in and I lost my thread.
We were talking about people assuming or saying that it's
Oh,
back to where it was.
I'm sorry, you're right. So I wrote this scathing response saying that, I mean, listen, after Katrina happened, the then Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert, actually said, if people, New Orleans is going to be too expensive to rebuild. If people want to hear jazz, they can go to Walt Disney World. Yeah, he said that. The letter I wrote him, I'm surprised I didn't get a knock on the door from the Secret Service, because it was pretty caustic. But the point is, no. I mean, here's the thing. New Orleans jazz was born of the confluence of the African diaspora and the European. New Orleans was the opera capital of the world in the of the hemisphere in the 1700s. There was opera going on. There was African rhythms going on. Those two combined, people risked going to jail because integration was against the law. And musicians were routinely, when they were caught jamming together, rounded up by the police and sent to jail. The point is, the energy of New Orleans is what created its art. Katrina, so I guess here's the thing. I was asking a post-conviction capital defense attorney, last American Heroes left, why music flourished in New Orleans, why the creativity flourished. And she said, that's easy, leisure time. In New Orleans, I mean, it's not called the Big Easy for nothing. And, you could always go by so-and-so mama's house who got some gumbo on the stove. You could make $0 in New Orleans and eat just fine. And so people hung out. They hung out with each other and they shedded and they created, music like Ellis Marcellus, the quintet, the early quintet. James Black, they influenced Coltrane and his quartet when they came and hung in New Orleans. They influenced, there was a great tenor player named Nat Parlett who was playing sheets of sound while Coltrane was still playing 2/5s. And New Orleans has an incredible power, like even to this day. And I'm sorry, this is kind of a rambling all over the map answer. But even to this day, there's a soul food restaurant on Esplanade called Little Dizzy's Cafe, owned by the Baquet family. One of their sons is Dean Baquet, the editor of the New York Times. We have influence, the culture informs on a global level. And what happened during Katrina was this indigenous, rich heritage of multiple generations of French, Spanish, African American, Italian, Irish. All of these people had their neighborhoods and they interacted with each other, and most of the white people were raised by black people. There was a separation of the races, but there was a communing of the races, informally, both artistically and socially. After Katrina, all that leisure time that I spoke of earlier, that went away. Because predatory investors came in, bought up all the housing stock, fixed up all the houses, the rents became Manhattan level rents, and the salaries did not follow. So the indigenous people, the people who sat on the front stoop, checking out the latest Sonny Stitt record, wondering how that fit in and trying to comp the notes. Those people suddenly had to work 2 and 3 jobs just to afford the place they lived in all their lives. And it was a cultural genocide. I didn't have any patience for the writer that said, oh, I'm writing a piece about how it's all back now. No, it's not. Now, I understand all culture erodes. I understand that. Culture changes. When I came out as a kid, it's like, man, I was playing Danny Barker on Bourbon Street for 6 hours. Then I go play a bebop gig with James Black and Earl Turbington after. And then, 6 in the morning, we go to somebody's house and shed till noon. It was like amazing. And I'd say, wow, this is really. And the old cats would say, this ain't nothing like it used to be. Man, we used to be this and this and this. Now, kids go on Frenchman Street and play for the door and mostly out-of-town musicians that are playing 20s and 30s swing music that tourists think is New Orleans traditional music. They don't know the difference. Incidentally, a side note, we never call it Dixieland because of the word Dixie, and because Dixieland music didn't start in New Orleans. The first jazz record contract was offered to Freddie Keppard, a jazz trumpet player that was a contemporary of Buddy Bolden's, by Verve Records. But in what has proved to be a long history of New Orleans musicians either over or undervaluing themselves, he asked for way too much money. So the first jazz record contract went to 5 white guys from Kansas City called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band, and that was the moniker for the music. We call it traditional New Orleans music. The thing about Dixieland, it sounds like circus music. For us, was one to play two. And that has to do with second line in the streets, one to play two and one to play four, when the bass and the drummer walk in four. And those sections, like in the trios, when I say trios, I'm talking about like original Dixieland one step. Dun, 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 dun. You know, they're like John Philip Sousa type marches, and they have different key areas, but they're very specific parts. There's time, how many times do you repeat each section? When do you play two? When do you play four? These are all part of traditional New Orleans music that Dixieland players rarely, if ever, acknowledge. So that's the basic difference.
I'm so glad you made a distinction. You included A-U-R-A-L and O-R-A-L, because a lot of times you read, jazz was an oral music, O-R-A-L, and I thought, no, not really. I mean, it's more about the ears. The things you're describing, people just have to like soak it up by hearing it, and then learning how to do it.
It's like, for instance, Zigaboo, one of the greatest drummers to come from New Orleans. He was the drummer for the Meters. He spent almost every night of his life by a back screen door listening to Idris Muhammad play bebop. And if you hear him play, once I heard Zigaboo play a gig with Sam Rivers. Sam Rivers was a kind of an avant-garde tenor saxophonist. He put the horn in his mouth, and 55 minutes later, the set was over. You know, just incredible, just stream of consciousness. Zigaboo was like just playing stuff you'd never heard him play. Matter of fact, I had a group with Zigaboo, George Porter on bass, Nicholas Payton, and myself. We called it Fleur de Bris. And I mean, Zigaboo sounded like Elvin. Like, just amazing. So part of the New Orleans tradition is that we grew up having to play many different styles. And so there was no, it was just all New Orleans music. Like, if I were to ask you, what is New Orleans music, what would you say?
I honestly couldn't answer.
I know. Is it Al Hurt? Is it the Neville Brothers? Is it Manny Fresh? Is it Pete Fountain? What is it? It's like, it's not a style. It's an attitude of playing music underwater. Because in New Orleans, we're underwater. Danny Barker used to say that. That's why trumpet players from there, that's why Nicholas Payton, Al Hurt, that's why these trumpet players have such a big sound. It's like, you go to a baseball game and a batter puts weights on his bats and swings it. They have to push against this weight to get a sound. This weight of the humidity in the air. The drummers have to work a little extra to get the sound waves to push the water out of the way so we can hear it. I know that sounds a little metaphysical, but the point is, creating and performing music below sea level is a different physical process than gasping for air in Denver or playing bebop in New York. So that's part of why people from New Orleans sound different. I mean, what sets New Orleans pianists apart? I mean, Alan Toussaint sounded very French, very ornate, very French. Luis Moreau Gacho was, in fact, French. James Booker did a lot of Chopin affectations, and affectations is the wrong word because that makes it sound less than it was. He assimilated a lot of Chopin's appoggiatura and flourishing in what he played. what is the one aspect that all New Orleans pianists, indigenous New Orleans pianists, share? Humidity. Their playing sounds humid. It sounds like you could literally, like Alan's song Southern Nights, you could sit on a porch and just listen to the locusts, and the piano would be a score for that.
Wow.
And so it's a real magical place that I'm sorry to say is in cultural decline, in the midst of homogeny and, what's the word? When a place gets bouged up?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that one, that word.
Like Brooklyn, like.
Oh, yeah. And, gentrification, exactly, thank you. And so that's what's happening, you know, it's sad to see, but thankfully there's institutions like WWOZ and the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival that are kind of working to memorialize that and still support the guys from the old school that are still trying to do it, so.
Yeah. When you were talking about the force of the trumpet players and the drummers
And trombone players.
it made me think of Sidney Bechet,
Oh, sure.
who's like with that soprano sax, like a laser.
And his vibrato, you notice how his vibrato is church-like, oh, come on, the gospel singer, the famous gospel singer.
Mahalia Jackson.
Yes,
Yeah.
you know, it has that power, and, you know, it's the same thing, the church informed the music quite a bit. You know, Herlin Riley, to this day, his father was a minister, his grandfather was a minister, and so was his grandmother. He won't play when the saints go marching in, if it's not in church.
Oh.
You know, it's like, that's sacred music, and this is a secular venue, we're not gonna do that. So I've seen him at festivals, and the band leader calls saints, and he'll just lay out. You know.
Do a Chuck Berry on him.
Oh, yeah, man. I thought I told you not to mention it.
I'm sorry. Last time.
Sure.
So, from a piano playing standpoint, I'm wondering if there's 5 really accomplished piano players, lots of technique, why does one of them get more calls than the other?
Oh, you mean calls for work?
Yes.
Oh, well, that could be, he's a snappy dresser, but actually, you know, it boils down to, I was having this conversation the other day, and this is a backwards way to answer your question, that's what most of my answers have been. You know, jazz music, playing on the bandstand is supposed to be a mature conversation among equals. And it's, you know, it's like, oh, you hear somebody say something, oh, really, and you comment. And it's really high-minded in that sense. I can't really play, I used to play second keyboards for a time behind George Duke. And he used to tell me, he said, just as soon as you can, stop being a fan. Because I was like, I was playing like, I was trying to play like, he goes, no, that's my shit, you play your shit. And I'm on the bandstand with Nicholas Payton, and it's so transformative. It's like the closest I'm ever gonna get to playing with Miles. He's deeper by a factor of 10 than anyone else playing music right now. And, you know, he'll play something, and it's like, whoa, and that breaks the conversation among sentient beings. I become a fan, so it's very, very difficult. To answer your question, why does one guy get a call? Because he's a better hang. If there's 5 good piano players, the good hang gets the call. Why? Because it's not just about the conversation on the bandstand, it's about the conversation off the bandstand, it's about the spirit and the vibe that sets up the performance, or that allows the performance to be uninhibited. So, or he might be on time, he might be dressing well, who knows? And then some people would opt for the opposite of that. Maybe the other guy gets the call because he breaks the rules, and people prefer guys that break the rules. People prefer guys that make mistakes and then figure out how to get out of it. Mm-hmm. So, it's like all of the 5 piano players are going to be working, and like water seeks its level, they will all all the 5 piano players will be in situations where they're supposed to be. Did you ever see the letter that was written by a monk student that was online? And, it's just like he wrote down Monk's observations.
Oh, I might have seen that, like, if you don't hear anything,
Correct.
right, yeah.
That one, and the drummer makes the sound of the band, and don't ever ask for a gig, just shed, and and a gig will come to you. My favorite one was the last one. He was quoted as saying, "They keep trying to get me to hate white people, but somebody always comes along and fucks it up." I love that. That's great. That's good.
Okay, let's talk about a typical week or 2 weeks for you when you're not on the road in New Orleans. I'm going to guess that you, in order to make a living as a musician,
I was painting my house.
Okay.
Pretty kind of sea green color. All the things I do are related to music because first of all, my father was a symphony conductor, wonderful violinist. He could sight read a transposed score on piano. Don't ask.
Oh,
yeah,
man.
that freaky stuff.
Mm.
And my mother was a world-renowned flamenco dancer. So, I grew up in a culturally very rich household. Once 20 years ago, I took her to Spain, and they'd stop flamenco performance, say, "Ladies and gentlemen, please," we had. So, there was gypsies around the house. My father used to turn his violin over and jam with flamenco guitarists, who couldn't read music. So there was always this very rich, the flamenco, the Spanish people have describe something called duende, which is kind of an inner magic that, that all artists that we love have. We can't describe it, but it's there. And, the classical music, my father used to love the Ellington quote, "There's only 2 kinds of music, good and bad." So, my father used to love to improvise within classical music. And my mother actually choreographed, made different size wooden boxes that were kind of little risers of different lengths. And she choreographed a Bach toccata and fugue for flamenco dancers. She devised a notation for heel work. And so the Bach toccata and fugue was realized with flamenco dancers approximating the pitches. It was cool. It's cool. Excuse me. So, I diverted again from your question. What's a typical 2 weeks for me? I love, I immerse myself in music, all kinds of music. And I like to go see music. I like to play music. I used to be director of broadcast for Voodoo Music and Arts Experience. You wouldn't think that somebody that plays jazz music likes EDM, electronic dance music.
Oh.
These guys program some great stuff and they press play and they become cheerleaders. And lights and, raging kids. It's cool, but there's some of those guys that open up sections in that music for cats to blow over.
Oh.
And so I actually have a part-time persona as a DJ, and I bring like the killer musicians, and I try to do that. I'm also, I produce events, I curate, when Dr. John was alive, he used to come out for special events and money to play 2 or 3 tunes, and then Irma Thomas 2 or 3 tunes, then Kermit, little mini jazz festival. So, and I score music for films, and I do music for advertising. I just try to, everything in music. I have a studio in New Orleans that I just use to create in. So.
You ever have a situation like someone wants a jingle and someone comes in and, okay, we want it to go like, "It's Turkey Day at Cumberland Farms," and have to do something with that idea?
I don't get approached for those, but I like your idea. Let me write that down. No, I usually get approached with, "Hey, this is the demographic we're trying to appeal to. Do you have?" And they'll do some. Advertising people are notorious for, can can you come up with something that feels like cheese? And I'm saying, well, your request is a good place to start. But no, I usually get asked a little more abstractly than that. It's not, that era of jingle is over. Except that, it's coming back, liberty, liberty, liberty,
I keep, every time I hear that, I go, I wonder who wrote that.
Well, he's getting paid, number one, and he just did a major triad and do, re, mi, and he managed to get the product name in a short musical logo 4 times.
Amazing.
Liberty, liberty, that was 3 and 4. Amazing. So, those gigs are good if you can get it. But that's sort of hearkening back to by men and, where it's a sung jingle.
Right.
Normally, my requests are on not even. I did one that was cool though. It was "Lean on Me" for Dove dishwashing soap, and it was like washing the oil off a bird's wings, and it was cool.
Oh.
And we did it with Taj Mahal's daughter, who sang so soulfully. It was great. Yeah, it's great. So those are kind of fun to do. I try not to, to descend into the world's oldest profession too deeply.
How do you figure out how to price those things?
Man, it's difficult. But the union is no longer relevant as far as setting those prices because broadcast has gone away. Everything's going online. So that really did upset the apple cart. It used to be like, well, is it local? Is it regional? Is it national?
Mm-hmm.
So I usually ask for too much money, and sometimes the client goes away and sometimes they don't. So I actually have no idea. I mean, I usually ask, what's your budget? And then they lie to me and I double it and So.
And you bring in, is it mostly keyboard generated music or do you bring in people?
It depends. I was the composer for a USA TV series called The Big Easy, which was loosely based on the movie. And the reason I was called was because, first of all, the rule of a movie or a television program is the lamer it is, the more music it needs. Well, this was damn near wall-to-wall music.
I gotta write that down.
But also I used many New Orleans indigenous musicians. And, I find it, if you get Donald Harrison to come in and go, it has more emotion than you can possibly do on a keyboard. Now, when there's jeopardy and there's drones involved, then, I'll take a sample of a marching band tuba and I'll affect it, So there's things you can do, but I like to start with human beings.
Okay, speaking of human beings, singers, playing behind singers.
I was the pianist with Diane Reeves for 9 years.
I read that.
And it's a very, very intimate relationship. Like, just when they're singing out of time, it's like you start to learn to listen for the mouth opening because they're about to go, and where the downbeat is. So it's a very, the best at it I've ever heard, besides Jimmy Rolls and the old guys, is Mulgrew Miller. He was so good. He was so good at it. He was playing. Billy Childs, really great at it. There's a lot of great accompanists. I was never on that level, but I could always intuit phrasing pretty well. So
you had a little anecdote about on the radio thing playing behind David Bartholomew, and he was playing Body and Soul.
Oh yeah.
And he, it sounded to me like maybe he dropped a beat here and there.
Well, he definitely dropped the beat, and and same thing with singers. It's not about being right and wrong. You make whatever. No, your role as an accompanist is to justify what happens. You're accompanying them, and just because they may have gotten a point off on their musicology final exam doesn't mean that you leave them out to dry. And especially a griot, an icon as Dave Bartholomew. He doesn't, But Dr. John called me up at the radio station after. Yeah, I heard what you did, bro. So,
You caught that, you fixed that.
Yeah, that was slick.
What should a singer?
Now I'll say this as
Okay.
an aside. Dr. John could play Bill Evans tunes. He was a musician of the highest order. When you hear Dr. John play Waltz for Debbie, it's like transformative. Yeah, but obviously he wasn't known for that, but he's a good musician. Sorry, you were going to.
Well, what would you tell an aspiring singer to have ready when they go? They're going to sit in a club, or they're trying to get their name out there. What should they bring to the table besides
knowledge? Know what tune they want to sing. If they're sitting in, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Know what tune they want to sing. Make it a tune or two. Or your first objective is to, after the end of the tune, to be asked to sing another. If you're asked to sit down after the first tune, you got to go back to the shed. But first of all, pick a tune that plays to the strength of the band. If the band is a swinging band, pick a swing tune and trade with the drummer, really interact. They're not there to back you up. Even on a gig, if it's your band, they're not there to back you up. You're one of the musicians. You're part of the interplay. And also, very important, know your key. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I ask the singer, okay, what key? I don't know. Look at me, and yeah, so I would say that. And, as just in terms of how you approach the music, don't sing any words longer than you say them. The rendering of a lyric to communicate with the common man, people are bombarded with all kind of stuff. Now, Frank Sinatra, some of my favorite singers don't have very good voices. Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, they didn't have great voices, but they knew how to render a lyric. And that concept is like when you cook a piece of meat, you're rendering the fat. When you render a lyric, you're excising the meaning out of every syllable. That's what rendering a lyric is. And you're telling a story. So don't be so in your head that you're concentrating on how you sound, and by all means don't scat unless you've transcribed solos, because many singers, and really many great singers think they can scat, and it's all bullshit. There's a singer in Manhattan named Veronica Swift. She's the next big thing. She's transcribed Freddie. She's deep, deep, deep. So don't scat, because it's been done so well already that unless you're good, you're going to get exposed.
Wow, great answers. I was watching you play.
Speaking of exposed, I was watching
you play on that video, and trying to imagine what's going on in your head. Because you were playing body and soul, and I think you started with a bridge, as a matter of fact. Or it was almost like you played the bridge as an intro.
Right.
So I'm going to assume that was done on the spot.
Oh, sure.
Okay. But then, I'll shorten the question. Can you tell me what you're thinking about when you're improvising?
Those two are dichotomous. It's like, can you tell me what you're thinking about when you're making love to your wife? Well, if you're thinking about anything, it's like, that's totally, not part of the process. Same thing with improvising. The idea is to just let your inner voice take over. Some people sing along with their solos. I'm not a big fan of that, because I think that kind of locks you into,
what your voice can do.
Right? Yeah, which, great musicians such as Louis Armstrong could play anything they could sing, and they could sing anything they could play, and Earl Garner used to sing by going, I have a great DAT recording of Albert Collins doing a guitar solo, but the amp is in another room. It's just a microphone, his talkback microphone, and you can hear his strings going, know, so you can hear acoustically his strings, but he's going, it sounds like a demonic possession. It's unbelievable. But, I'm sorry, I'm digressing again.
What you're describing,
Excuse me.
what you're describing obviously takes years of like preparation and knowledge so that you can
Let
go and not have to think too hard. And
I mean, let me say this, my solo piano playing is pretty much the least interesting thing I've ever heard. You know, like you hear Ellis Marcellus sit down and play when he was filling in for Ellis Larkin at the Carnegie Lounge in Manhattan. Just wonderful, flowing, lyrical, delicate, grooving, swinging stuff. And you know, I mean, I hear my solo stuff back, and like for instance, I just 2 years ago I did a solo piano set at Newport. And, you know, I just didn't feel good about it at the time. Matter of fact, before the hit, you know, I got a call from the New York Times guy and said, hey man, I'd really love to interview you, you know, about your upcoming Newport performance. How about if we, you know, talk right after the set? So I finished the set and the guy came up and said, hey man, you know, it's really good. Listen, I have another interview. Why don't you just give me a call? So I said, yeah, so I was like, cool, thanks. My solo piano is a work in progress. I'm not a huge stride player, which, what am I doing playing with Evan Christopher? But, you know, I do have some unique New Orleans-isms that are informed by my heroes, like Dr. John, like James Booker, and I incorporate them into my playing to, not in a considered way, but just it's been infused. So you know, I'm not thinking about anything. I didn't even know what I was going to play. I was probably referencing that in my mind, that David Bartholomew moment when I started playing Body and Soul. Because Mac called me and it was for Mac, you know, that type of thing.
yeah.
So, yeah, I try not to, sometimes I'm more abstract. I try to think of shapes, you know, I mean, Kenny Werner, Richie Byrick, you know, all these cats have come up with new harmonic approaches, and I try to at least allude to that. One time I was at Mount Fuji Jazz Festival playing with Diane, and it was a monsoon typhoon outside. Everybody was jet lagged. They were up in the lobby at 2 and 3 in the morning, and Herbie and Mulgrew and a bunch of other cats, Herbie was doing a piano masterclass on the piano in the lobby, and somebody asked, Herbie, man, what are those changes at the end of Dolphin Dance? He goes, oh man, well, I used to play this, and now I play this. And it was like, oh my God, I never even thought about that. So I just, to this day, I take those voices that he showed me and try to, you know, hear them without, oh, I know what this is. I try to hear them. It's difficult. But when I'm playing, I try not to, I'm just trying to make it through.
Make it through.
Yeah.
From point A to point
Correct.
B.
Correct.
Or skip B and
Yeah, I mean, you know, and sometimes I'll take a left and, oh, wait a minute, okay, and then I'll go here. So it's sort of a journey. It's not evolved like I like, but I'm still working on it.
Sometimes I'm mystified by the substitution chords that people come up with, and I wonder if there's...
And like reharmonizations?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can overdo that, for sure. I mean, the whole point of is there are no chords. Jazz is a counterpoint between the bass and the melody. And, you know, the chords are implied by that counterpoint. You know, the true jazz musician doesn't pay attention to vertical constructs. You know, okay, C7, da-da-da-da-da, okay, B-flat 7. I mean, you're not supposed to. I mean, that's not the point. That's popular music. You know, jazz music is linear. It's linear. It's Don Cherry. It's World Saxophone Quartet. It's
even Ellington, his writing was more like that. He had all those lines going on.
Correct. Matter of fact, one of my best courses at Berkeley was Herb Pomeroy's line writing class. And it's like you started with this note and you ended with this note, and your whole thing was to write an interesting melody. Now the bass or the next voice just start at this point, end at this point, and write an interesting melody. And then look, I mean, the strength of the melody is so strong that the harmony makes itself. It's like Nicholas Payton can play, we're playing a D minor construct, D minor something, modal, whatever. He can play something in E flat minor or something totally, and he can just shape it with such intent. Listen, what's the difference between jazz music and classical music? At least it used to be. Classical music was principally about execution and very little about intent. Jazz music is exactly the opposite. It's mostly about intent and not as much about execution. Now, Linton and other accomplished musicians have changed that aesthetic. But like, for instance, Kermit Ruffins, you've heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he can barely play the trumpet. But every note he plays sounds meaningful and it draws you in because he means it, like Louis Armstrong did.
Wow. You hung out with Danny Barker and Errol Garner.
Well, in my senior year of high school, I had a gig with Walter Lasty. It was my gig, but Walter Lasty was the drummer. He was one of Herlin Riley's uncles, and we had a band when Herlin Riley played trumpet. He played trumpet before he played drums. And a bass player, and Sam Alcorn, great trumpet player. We had a gig at the top of a hotel. It was late night. I missed all my morning classes. And then we transitioned to a club on Bourbon Street, a mob joint called the Stage Door Canteen, which was modeled, actually, the same people as the one in New York. And we were the house trio. We'd play behind, they'd bring in comics, we'd play behind them, we'd play our own set. And for 2 weeks, they brought in the Errol Garner Quartet. Errol Garner, Jimmy Smith on the drummer, Jimmy Smith, Eugene McCarty, I think it was, on bass. And Jose Manuel on conga. It was so killer. And during those 2 weeks, Errol Garner gave me some piano lessons. So that's how I got to hang out with him. Yeah, I was been fortunate to be able to come in at the end of an era and still, you know, through Diane Reeves and through just various associations, been very fortunate to have had the chance to play with some iconic musicians.
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but Danny Barker and Errol Garner, they obviously didn't go to Berkeley. They didn't.
Oh no! As a matter of fact, Errol Garner, you know, couldn't read music.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
And Danny Barker could read chord changes, but he was a very natural musician.
Yeah.
But that's another example of what I was talking about earlier, as far as New Orleans musicians affecting their culture, like for instance, Danny Barker moved to New York, played with Charlie Parker, played with Cab Calloway. He played behind Billie Holiday. His wife, Lulu Barker, is cited by Billie Holiday as being one of her major early influences, as far as how she approached. And you know, Lulu Barker came out, the church came out, New Orleans, you know, from the New Orleans streets. It was completely unsullied by music education. It was purely from the human experience, and their particular human experience that happens in humidity and happens in the social, economic tension that's in New Orleans. You know, not racial per se, but just it's a very complex and ever-changing myriad of energies. Not to sound too metaphysical.
That sounds great. You mentioned, sort of an aside, like, well, I'm not a great stride player, and here I am playing with Evan Christopher. But
No, he puts up with my faux stride.
your faux stride.
Yeah.
But as a working musician, you have to adapt constantly, especially if you're in the role of a sideman.
Sure, when I played keyboards with Boney James, there was no stride to be had. You didn't need stride.
Yeah.
I just needed sounds and you know, understanding how that, you know, understanding that he's not a bebopper, but his first influence was Grover. And, you know, there's great musicians in that smooth jazz world, like Kirk Whalum. I mean, all these wonderful musicians that are playing an artificial format, but it's just funk music. It's just an instrumental pop music is all it is. And so, as a New Orleans musician, I've played many different styles. I've played piano for silent movies, you know, just different things. So, and it's all fun. It's all great.
I'm going to turn a question around that I asked earlier about why of 5 piano players does one get the gig. What would cause you, if you had a steady gig somewhere and you had sidemen, sidewomen, what would cause you to fire somebody?
Have I ever fired anybody?
Or not?
I only did that one time. I had a trio gig in New Orleans. George Porter was the bass player. Great drummer named Troy Davis, who played a lot with, who's the Jamaican piano player? Monty Alexander. Really good player. Played with Terrence Blanchard a long time too. Really great New Orleans drummer. He was going out for a month with Monty. And I said, well, just send me somebody good. And he sent one of his students, a brilliant drummer named Simon Lott. So he called me a month later. He goes, hey, bro, I'm back in town. What's up? And I go, bro, I don't really know how to tell you this, but the guy you sent played you off the gig. He was that good. This cat has perfect balance. He made everything we played sound like a Blue Note record. He was so perfect. He was killer. Killer. He had good drum and bass chops. You know, he had all the language. And so I've never done that before or since, and he's probably still a little pissed at me for it. But what would cause me to fire somebody? Bad attitude or ineptitude.
Okay.
Toot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some you need, some you don't.
Yeah. I mean, I've fired people from studio recording sessions, but never fired them and not paid them. It's just like in the studio, and I learned this from George Duke, you don't hire a musician and then try to get them to play how you want in the studio. You get musicians that already play how you want, because otherwise you're not going to get,
I see.
you know, I mean, my mantra in the studio is it doesn't have to sound good. It just has to sound real. You know, why are the best music recordings live? Because it's real. It's not like, oh, let's take 7, or let's comp this solo together. It's human and it's real. So I've only replaced people on recordings. I've never really replaced people on a gig unless they're unreliable, show up late or show up fucked up, or you know.
Yeah.
Or I should say too fucked up.
Okay.
So yeah, I haven't done that. I was like, listen, Walter Lasty told me a long time ago, if you keep fast company, you get fast. So I always try to hire the best musicians possible.
Okay, here's a really personal question. What do you think of the record Green Onions?
You talking about Booker T?
Yeah.
I mean, it's classic. I fucking love that record. I love it.
The reason I thought of it is because you said it just has to sound real, and I'm so fascinated by that record because, like, first of all, it's just got this sound, but when Steve Cropper comes in his solo, it's like really too loud, and then it gets too soft, and then it gets just right. And I was thinking, man, if they had said, look, the balance is off, do it again, do it 5 more times.
I love people that make records and leave mistakes on their records. I love that. It's just like, come on. It's a snapshot in time, and it's, again, where intent trumps execution. You know, I try not to work in a studio with any engineer that doesn't know what this is. Womp, 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 womp,
Oh,
womp, womp. Slice.
Yeah.
Where's the guitar solo? Where's the guitar solo? Oh, it's around my neck. You know, I mean, and we can all perform meticulously perfect sonic surgery with Pro Tools, and I've used Pro Tools as well. But, because it's a studio standard and it's great, it's multi-tracks everybody can afford. But the process, there's nothing that sounds like tape. There's nothing that sounds like vinyl. It just, come on. I don't want to hear decoded zeros and ones when I can hear etched lacquer.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I saw that in the studio, though. What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're cutting the tape.
Right, right. Listen to
Fascinating.
where that kick drum is. Oh, there it is. Mark it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Do you have goals, musical goals?
There's a great drummer named John Vodakovich in New Orleans that I played with a long time within the Astral Project, and we get to play together some. Just wonderful painter. And I heard him on the radio, and you know the radio DJ said, "So what's your plans for the future?" And he goes, "Well, man, I hope to make my gig on time tonight." So my goals are to not be forgotten. Record more. I just did this, I told you I did this Newport record, which I've been kind of editing on and working on. I'll tell you a cool story. I thought, how great would it be if George Wein did an intro for it, like he was on stage. So, I went to his apartment, and he's 93, I came out and we visited for an hour talking, because I'm on the board of the New Orleans Jazz Festival, which he started, and we were talking about things. And finally, I realized, he's getting tired, and I put a microphone in his hand. George, you know what I need? Oh, yeah. And he hung his head for a minute. I went, oh, shit. Overtaxing a 93-year-old man. He's 96 now, or 95 now. And he finally raises, he goes, "Many years ago, I played on Bourbon Street with Red Narvo and Red Garland." Sorry. "Many years ago, I played on Bourbon Street with Red Narvo and Barney Kessel. Across the street was Al Hurt, and a young man playing with Al Hurt was Ellis Marcellus. And he and I became fast friends. We hung out every night. Now, New Orleans grows musicians, and one of Ellis's proteges is a young man named David Torkanowsky. He played with Diane Reeves and many great jazz artists, and I've heard him play over the years, and I said, this man belongs at Newport. Ladies and gentlemen, David, he did that shit in one take. And I went, oh my God, what a gangster. He's just the definition of the promoter,
Wow.
Entrepreneur. Amazing.
Yeah.
So, and he's also a good pianist.
Yeah.
In the Dick Hyman School. And
It's not a bad school to be in.
No, he has this beautiful piano in this beautiful old pre-war New York apartment, as you can imagine. It's spacious and beautiful and expensive. And I said, George, man, let me get an engineer and a rig over here. We'll get a Nat Cohen over here, and we'll get, a bass player. Why don't you let me do a record? And he goes, I'm having trouble hearing, my time. And I said, George, your time was never that good to begin with, bro. Trust me. Anyway, he still didn't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, I have enjoyed the heck out of this conversation.
Thanks, man.
And I'm looking very forward to hearing you tomorrow.
Okay.
And,
when my left hand falters on my faux stride, don't laugh. I'll know it's you.
Okay. By the way, I'm going to ask later. I'm going to ask Neil this question. I thought I'd ask you. In a piano trio, who's responsible? Is the bassist or the drummer more responsible for the time?
You would naturally probably tend to say the drummer, but I'll say this. I did a big band for the 100th anniversary of Sinatra, and we got the original Nelson Riddle charts and Count Basie charts and Sammy Kahn, another one of his band leaders. And, we had Harry Shearer, we had a bunch of, artists, and it was killer. handpicked a big band, we rehearsed, and the drummer, I'm not gonna say his name, because he's brilliant at everything, and I'm surprised that he even played big band as well. I mean, you could just Grady Tate it, and you don't have to, you don't have to do that, just swing. Anyway, this drummer missed a rehearsal due to a family illness, and it was just Neil. Neil swung the fuck out of that band, just without a drummer. So, I'm gonna say probably both, but the bassist, it depends on how assertive he is, and how willing he is to agree or disagree. I mean, if you listen to Mingus's band, him and the drummer never really played time together, but they agreed to disagree and it was still swinging. So, again, it's that forward motion. It's like, we don't have to get there in lockstep, but let's go to the same place. So,
Well said.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, man.